Welcome to Twilight Fables, where stories once told in candlelight return, draped in shadow and silence, reshaped into the haunting forms they always threaten to be. Tonight, we begin our descent into Cinderella, the cinders never washed away. No matter how hard she scrubbed at her skin, no matter how much her hands ached in soapy water, no matter how many times she dragged the bristles across the stone hearth until her knuckles bled, the ashes clung to her. They seemed to breathe with her, seep into her pores, stain her nails black. The household liked it that way. Her stepmother, tall and pale as dried bone, delighted in calling her Cinderella, sneering the name as if it were dirtier than the soot itself. Her stepsisters laughed in shrill unison whenever the word was spoken, pointing their powdered fingers at her. "You'll never be anything else," Drusilla, the older, would say. "No matter what rags you stitch together, no matter how long you dream." "And no prince would look at you twice," added Annabel, the younger, always mocking, always cruel. Cinderella lowered her gaze when they taunted her. She had learned that silence was armour, but silence did not soften the words. The words lodged in her chest and grew sharp edges, cutting her each night as she tried to sleep. The house itself groaned with cruelty. Her father had built it in happier years. Before illness took him to the grave, he had been gentle but weak, and once his eyes closed forever, her stepmother's eyes had sharpened. The house darkened. The mirrors were draped in cloth, the lamps dimmed, even the garden withered beneath the stepmother's hand. It was in this silence that Cinderella worked, mending gowns she would never wear, washing linens that did not belong to her, polishing shoes that would never carry her anywhere farther than the marketplace. She lived, half girl and half shadow, in a house that no longer remembered her name. Then came the announcement. It arrived in the form of a letter, stamped with the royal seal, carried by riders who thundered down the streets. The parchment glowed as if touched by sunlight, as if the words themselves could grant blessings. A ball, the crier declared, a grand celebration at the palace. His Highness, the Prince, shall choose among the maidens of the land for his bride. Every household is commanded to present their daughters. The stepsisters shrieked as if they had already been chosen. "Did you hear, Annabel? A royal wedding! Oh, Drusilla, it will be me. I am the most beautiful. No, me, for I am the most graceful." They spun, tripping over each other in the narrow hall, their powdered wigs askew, their silks rustling. The stepmother, however, was calm. Her eyes glistened with ambition as she read the letter again. "Both of you will attend, both of you will shine, and one of you," here her eyes lingered, "will ascend." No mention of Cinderella. None was needed. That night, after her sisters had collapsed into bed, with their laughter still echoing, Cinderella slipped into the kitchen. The fire was low. coals red as bleeding eyes. She sat upon the stones, hugging her knees, and whispered to the embers, would he look at me even once? The ashes did not answer, but something else did. A shiver passed through the room. The coals stirred as if a breath had touched them, and then, from the dark corner by the door, a voice emerged, soft, silken, carrying a sweetness that was also a knife. He might, if you wished it. Cinderella started, her heart racing. At first, she thought it was one of her sisters, mocking her again. But when she turned, she saw a woman unlike any she had ever seen. She was draped in grey, yet the grey shimmered like moonlight on water. Her hair coiled in silver spirals, and her eyes were like the glassy surface of a pond, reflecting everything, revealing nothing. She carried no lantern, yet her presence illuminated the kitchen. "Who are you?" Cinderella whispered. The woman smiled. "A friend to the forgotten, a handmaiden of chance. Some call me a godmother." Cinderella's lips parted. She had heard tales, old stories told by her father, about spirits who blessed cradles or bent fate with a touch. She had dismissed them as fantasies, yet here the figure stood, shimmering and real. The godmother tilted her head. "Do you wish to go to the ball?" Tears burned behind Cinderella's eyes. "Yes, more than anything, but I cannot. The godmother raised an eyebrow. "Or will not? My stepmother would never allow it. I have no gown, no carriage, no shoes. Ah!" The godmother's laughter rippled through the room. Such simple obstacles, easily overturned. Cinderella's breath caught. "You could do that?" The godmother's eyes glowed faintly. "I can do more than that. But every wish carries weight. Every gift casts a shadow. Tell me, child, how much of yourself are you willing to sacrifice to be seen?" Cinderella hesitated. The words were sharp, too sharp, but she thought of the ballroom, of music and candlelight, of the prince who had lived only in rumour. She thought of her sisters' mocking laughter, her stepmother's sneer, the endless years of ashes clinging to her skin. "I would give anything," she whispered. The godmother smiled again, and this time her teeth gleamed too brightly. "Then anything you shall give." The transformation was not as the stories told. The pumpkin did not glow and grow. The rags did not simply shimmer into silk. No, this was a slower, stranger thing. The godmother placed her hand upon Cinderella's cheek, and a chill spread through her skin, sinking deep, curling around her bones. The air smelled of burning herbs, sharp and bitter. Her reflection in the soot-dark window began to ripple. Her cheekbones shifted, her nose sharpened, her lips changed shape, plumping into something unfamiliar. She touched her face in terror as the skin crawled beneath her fingers. What are you doing to me?" The godmother's voice was calm. "Making you what you wish to be, making you someone the prince will see." The kitchen filled with whispers, as if voices had risen from the ashes. They spoke her sisters' names, Drusilla Anastelle, Drusilla, Anastelle. Cinderella's hair lightened into a pale sheen. Her skin grew flawless, unmarked by cinder or sun. The gown that formed around her was woven not of cloth, but of memory, stitched together from all her years of watching her stepsisters preen before mirrors. When the magic finished, she gasped. The face that looked back at her from the darkened window was not her own. It was Drusilla's. "No," she whispered, recoiling. "Not her." The godmother only smiled. "You wish to be seen. He has seen her. Now he will see you." Her body trembled. Horror churned in her stomach. But over it rose something else. Hope, sharp and unbearable. The prince would look at her. He would believe she was beautiful. He would dance with her. The godmother extended her hand. The carriage awaits. The palace was fire and gold. Candles burned in crystal holders, their light glimmering across marble floors. Music filled the air, so rich it seemed to lift the very walls. Silks and jewels spun across the hall as the maidens of the kingdom danced and curtsied, their eyes fixed on the prince. And the prince, he stood at the heart of it all, tall and bright as a flame, his hair dark as ink, his smile sharp as sunlight. He glanced from girl to girl, polite but unimpressed. His attention flickered like a candle about to gutter, until he saw her, until he saw Drusilla. But it was not Drusilla, it was Cinderella, wearing her sister's face, her sister's shape. The crowd parted as he approached, his gaze fixed wholly on her. "May I have this dance?" he asked. Her heart thundered so loudly, she thought it might crack her ribs. She lowered her head in feigned modesty, just as she had seen her stepsister do, and placed her hand in his. And then she was dancing. The world blurred, sound melted, only the prince remained real. His eyes burned into hers, filled with awe, with longing. For the first time in her life, someone looked at her not as a servant, not as a shadow, but as if she were everything. She knew it was a lie. She knew he looked not at Cinderella, but at Drusilla, and yet she did not care. For that night, for those moments, the lie was worth more than the truth. When midnight neared, the clock began to toll. The godmother's warning echoed in her ears. "Leave before the 12th chime, or the spell will unravel." Panic surged. She pulled away, fled down the steps, glass shoes shattering light across the marble. Behind her, the prince called out, desperate, but she did not turn. One slipper fell. She left it, heart hammering, as the carriage whisked her away. Back in the kitchen, the ashes stirred as the spell unravelled. Her face twisted back, her bones groaned, her skin blackened with soot. She collapsed, panting, staring at her roughened hands, her rags, her filth, and yet her lips curved in a trembling smile. "He looked at me," she whispered. "He looked at me." The godmother appeared in the corner once more, her smile colder this time. He looked at her, not you. He looked at the mask I gave you. Cinderella raised her eyes, wild with need. Then let me keep it, please. I don't care if it's me or her. I don't care if it's a lie. Let me keep being her. Let me be the one he loves. The godmother's eyes glittered like shards of glass. Careful, child. Every bargain has teeth. But Cinderella only whispered again, louder this time, her voice breaking. Let me keep her face. The ashes trembled, as if they were laughing. And somewhere, in the silent palace, the prince clutched the glass slipper in his hands, swearing he would find the woman it fit. Servants whispered of the way. He stalked the corridors until dawn, the single glass slipper clutched in his hands like a relic. His eyes burned with obsession, and his words repeated in a fevered loop. She is mine. I must find her. I will not rest until I do. The slipper glowed faintly, even in darkness. Perhaps it was candlelight, perhaps magic, but to the prince it was a beacon. It was proof that the girl he had held in his arms had not been a dream. When dawn came, the proclamation followed. Every maiden in the kingdom would try the shoe. The woman whose foot it fit would be his bride. The news struck the household like a thunderclap. Annabelle shrieked with delight, twirling clumsily in her nightgown. It was me! He must have noticed me. He has chosen me. Drusilla scowled, her sharp features twisted with disbelief. No, it was me. I danced with him. I had his eye. The two fought like cats in the corridor, pulling hair and tearing lace. Their mother swept between them, her voice as cold as the marble floor. Enough. Both of you shall present yourselves. Both of you shall try. One of you will rise. One of you will wear the crown. Cinderella stood at the edge of the hall, clutching the wash bucket to her chest. Invisible, invisible, but laughing deep inside, though she dared not let it show. She alone knew the truth. She alone had danced in the prince's arms, but she had done so not as herself. Her heart twisted. She remembered the way his eyes had softened, the way his hand had steadied her waist, the way he had leaned close as though to whisper something secret before the clock struck. She remembered the thrill, the agony of being seen, and the lie that made it possible. She could not bear to lose it. So when the household dispersed, when her stepsisters preened before their mirrors, and their mother plotted in whispers, Cinderella crept back into the kitchen, where the ashes still glowed faintly. She knelt, trembling, and called softly, "Godmother!" The air shivered, shadows stirred, folding in on themselves, until the figure appeared once more, tall, silver-haired, her eyes like a frozen pond. "You call, child," the godmother said. "Why?" Cinderella bowed her head. "He is searching. He will bring the slipper, but it will not fit me, not as I am." A sly smile touched the godmother's lips. "So you wish me to alter you again?" "Yes," the word burst out, sharp with desperation. Please, make me her again. Make me the one he loves. The godmother's laughter was soft, almost tender. And what will you give this time? You've already offered me your face. What else will you surrender? Cinderella's hands clenched against the stones. Her nails scraped soot. Anything. I told you. I would give anything. The godmother leaned close, her breath icy. Be careful, child. Once given, there is no return. Each piece you yield to me, each scrap of your true self, gone forever. Do you understand? I don't care, Cinderella whispered. If I cannot have him, what use is myself? The godmother studied her a long moment, then smiled with teeth like knives of glass. So be it. The magic came differently this time. It was slower, more invasive, as if the godmother were not draping a mask over her face, but carving it into her flesh. The bones beneath her skin creaked, reshaping, while her reflection flickered in the kitchen window. Her own face, then Drusilla's, then hers again, blurring until the line between them grew thin as smoke. Her throat burned. She gasped, clutching it, as her voice twisted into a tone not her own. When it ended, she staggered to her feet, panting. Her hands trembled as she touched her face. Smooth, sharp, beautiful, Drusilla's. But in her eyes, yes, there was something else. Something of herself had remained, a shadow lurking beneath the borrowed skin. The godmother's gaze was unreadable. It will hold longer this time. But every mask must root itself somewhere. When the slipper is brought, it will fit this shape, not because it is truth, but because you have chosen it to be truth. Do you understand? Cinderella swallowed, fear and elation twisting together. Yes, then go, the godmother whispered. Play your part. The prince's soldiers arrived at the door 3 days later. The stepmother greeted them with false warmth, ushering them in as though the house had not grown dim and rotted under her rule. Annabelle nearly tripped over her own skirts in eagerness, pushing forward. Me first, it must be me. She seized the slipper, nearly dropping it, and jammed her foot inside. Too small. Her toes curled painfully, her skin split, but no matter how she forced, the shoe rejected her. No, she wailed. It is mine. I was the one he loved. The soldiers shook their heads. The stepmother silenced her with a glare. Then my eldest, she said, turning to Drusilla. But Drusilla faltered, for in that moment her eyes caught her reflection in the hallway mirror, and for the first time she hesitated. Was that truly her face, or was there something missing, something hollow? Her hand shook as she lifted the slipper. She pressed her foot in, strained, winced, but it would not fit. It must fit, she hissed, but it did not. The soldiers began to turn away. The stepmother, panic rising, demanded, "Wait, there is another." The servant girl. Cinderella stepped forward from the shadows, head bowed, heart thundering. She could feel the mask tightening over her bones, the spell burning within her skin. The soldier extended the slipper, Her fingers brushed the glass. It was warm. She lifted her foot, slid it inside, and it fit perfectly. Not because it was her own, not because she was truly the one from the ball, but because she had chosen the lie, and the lie had chosen her. The room erupted in shock. Anastelle screamed. Drusilla's face twisted with horror, as though she looked upon a thief wearing her skin. The stepmother's lips trembled with rage, but the soldiers bowed. "The prince's bride," they said. Cinderella swayed, dizzy with triumph and terror. The mask had held. The godmother's voice whispered faintly in her ear, unheard by the rest. "It fits because you willed it. It fits because you no longer remember where the truth ends and the lie begins. Be careful, child. The more you wear another's skin, the less of your own you will keep." But Cinderella only clutched the slipper tighter, her smile trembling, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I don't care," she whispered to herself. "He will love me. That is enough." That night, she was taken to the palace. Silk was draped over her shoulders. Jewels were clasped around her neck. Servants bowed, murmuring reverently. She was no longer the girl in the ashes. She was the bride of a prince. And yet, when she caught her reflection in the gold-framed mirrors, she hesitated. The face looking back at her was not hers. Her smile faltered. She touched the glass, half expecting the reflection to ripple, to reveal the soot-stained skin she had worn all her life. But the mirror was solid, cold. Behind her, the godmother's voice drifted like smoke. "Isn't this what you wanted?" Cinderella closed her eyes. Her heart ached, heavy as lead. "Yes," she whispered. "It is." But in the silence that followed, the ashes in her memory laughed. The palace was a place of wonders and whispers. From the moment she crossed its threshold, Cinderella felt the weight of eyes on her. Servants bent low in deference. Courtiers murmured behind gloved hands, and everywhere she turned, reflections of her borrowed face shimmered in polished marble and gilded mirrors. They called her Your Grace. They called her the Prince's Bride, and every time the words struck her ears, she smiled with trembling lips, unsure if they were speaking to her or to the mask she wore. The prince himself wasted no time. He led her through the gardens, their fountains spilling light, their hedges carved into shapes of beasts and kings. He held her hand tightly, as though fearful she might vanish if he let go. His eyes, dark and fever bright, never left her face. "You are everything," he whispered one night beneath the roses. "From the moment I saw you, I knew." Cinderella's chest ached. The words she longed to hear, words she had once dreamed of in the quiet of her cinders, now poured over her like wine, and yet each syllable was meant for another. Still, she nodded, smiled, let him press his lips to her hand. "And I knew as well," she lied. The wedding preparations began at once. Seamstresses swarmed her chambers, stitching silk and lace. Jewels from the royal vaults were laid before her, glittering like captured stars. Musicians rehearsed day and night, filling the halls with triumphant notes. And Cinderella, no, the girl who wore Drusilla's face, sat in silence as it unfolded. Each new stitch, each golden clasp, each embroidered veil bound her tighter into the role she had begged for. She no longer heard her name spoken aloud. Even the servants whispered only, "The bride, the princess to be." Sometimes she woke in the night with her own name caught in her throat like a swallowed coal, choking her until she gasped for breath. But when she opened her eyes, it was always Drusilla's face reflected in the looking glass. Meanwhile, at the old house, her stepsisters seethed. Anastelle raged against the walls, tearing at curtains, her voice hoarse from screams. "It should have been me. He looked at me. I'm sure of it. She's stolen him, stolen everything." Drusilla, by contrast, grew quiet, too quiet. She no longer laughed. She no longer fought with her sister. She only sat before the mirror, staring at her reflection with wide, hollow eyes. Some nights, her stepmother found her trembling, touching her face as though uncertain it was her own. "She wears me," Drusilla whispered once. "She wears me like a gown, and now the prince loves her for it." The stepmother hissed and struck her, unwilling to hear such madness. But even she began to watch the shadows differently, as though the walls themselves listened. Back at the palace, the godmother came and went as she pleased. Cinderella felt her presence in the corners of rooms, in the flutter of candlelight, in the chill that brushed her spine when no windows were open. Sometimes the figure appeared fully, stepping from the folds of shadow, her silver hair gleaming, her pond-dark eyes glittering. "You are content?" the godmother asked one evening, as Cinderella sat surrounded by gowns of white silk. "Yes," Cinderella answered, though her voice cracked. The godmother tilted her head. "Lies sit easily on your tongue now, perhaps too easily." Cinderella looked away. "I only speak what must be spoken." "And what of your own voice?" the godmother murmured. "Do you remember its sound? Do you remember the weight of your own name?" Cinderella pressed her hands to her ears. "Stop!" The godmother's laughter was soft, like ashes stirred by wind. "You wished to be loved, child, and so you are. But love that blooms from lies grows sharp roots. Be sure you can bear their thorns." With that, she vanished, leaving the mirrors quivering. The prince grew more fervent with each passing day. He spoke of destiny, of eternity, of the child they would one day have, who would bear her beauty and his strength. His gaze upon her was worship, and she basked in its warmth, even as it scalded her. But sometimes, when the court was gone, and the candles guttered low, his smile faltered. "You feel different at times," he whispered once, his hand cupping her cheek, almost as if you are two women, one I saw at the ball, and another I hold now. Her heart lurched. But I am she said quickly, too quickly. I am yours. His eyes narrowed with unease, but her lips on his silenced the doubt. Still, his words lingered. Two women, two selves, and on each night, as she undressed, she searched her body for signs of which remained. The wedding approached, the kingdom prepared feasts, banners, processions, bells rang in practice, echoing across the valley. The air itself seemed charged, alive with the breathless waiting of thousands, and Cinderella, cloaked in silk and jewels, walked the corridors of the palace as though in a dream. Yet in the corners of the mirrors, she sometimes caught glimpses of another girl, ashen-skinned, hollow-eyed, crouched in cinders. That girl reached for her, lips moving in silent plea. "Remember me," the reflection mouthed, but when Cinderella blinked, only Drusilla's flawless face stared back. The night before the wedding, she could not sleep. She wandered the gardens alone, the moon spilling silver across the roses. The air was cool, scented with night-blooming flowers, yet the weight in her chest would not ease. At the fountain's edge she whispered into the dark, "Godmother, please." And once again the woman came. This time her gown was darker, the shimmer dulled, her eyes deeper than shadow. She looked less like a benefactor and more like something called from the earth itself. "Why do you call, child?" Cinderella's hands trembled. "Tomorrow he will wed me. He will call me his own. But what if he sees? What if he learns the truth?" The godmother's smile was knife-thin. "The slipper fit, did it not? That was the test. He will not doubt, not unless you do." "But," Cinderella swallowed, "what if I forget myself completely? What if there is nothing left of me beneath this?" The godmother stepped closer, her eyes gleaming like frozen fire. "Then you will have what you begged for, a perfect mask, a perfect lie, love eternal, and you will never again suffer the pain of being unseen." Cinderella's breath came ragged, her heart pounded with terror and yearning. She thought of her father, of her mother, of her name whispered like a secret to the ashes. She thought of the prince's eyes burning into her, and she whispered, "Yes, let me forget. Let me be hers forever." The godmother's laughter rippled across the garden, low and cruel. So be it. The moonlight seemed to dim. The roses withered at the edges, and when Cinderella gazed into the fountain's waters, the girl reflected back at her was not herself at all. Drusilla smiled from the ripples, and Cinderella, her true self, faded into silence. He stepped down first, hands gripping the polished railing of the carriage, and the heralds followed with measured, echoing steps. Behind them, the servants shuffled, carrying cushions and scrolls and the inevitable mirrors of the court, polished and reflective, intended to examine her every gesture. Cinderella, sitting demurely in the shadows, felt the familiar pull of her own heartbeat. She pressed her hands to her lap, flexing her fingers, as though the motion alone could steady the storm inside her chest. The glass slipper gleamed faintly, warm against her foot. She knew that it had claimed her, tied her to a role she had chosen, and yet every pulse of her veins screamed with the terror of the truth. She was not the girl he believed her to be. The prince's gaze swept the room before it fell upon her, and in that instant, time itself seemed to pause. He approached with the measured step of a man accustomed to command, yet there was a reverence in his movement, a careful delicacy in the way he observed her. Every breath, every flick of silk, every tilt of her head was catalogued in the depth of his mind. "You," he said simply, his voice low and certain. "You are she." Cinderella's lips curved into a careful smile. Her stomach knotted, a mix of exhilaration and dread. Yes, she thought. Yes, I am she, but not me, not myself. The stepmother's expression twisted into something almost feral as she observed him. Her lips parted as if to protest, to demand her daughters be chosen instead. But the prince's hand lifted, halting her words mid-air. "All must be presented," he said firmly. "All will have their moment, but she," his hand gestured towards Cinderella, "she is the one." The room grew still, the air thick as candle smoke. Even the servants held their breath. Cinderella rose slowly, letting the fabric of her gown sweep over the polished floor. Her body moved gracefully, almost unnaturally so, the result of every step observed, every gesture rehearsed in secret in the mirrors of her modest home. She had become Drusilla in essence and form, and yet, beneath the borrowed skin, her pulse raced in her own rhythm. When the prince's hand came to her elbow, guiding her toward the carriage, her chest constricted. For the first time, she realized the full gravity of what she had chosen. She had traded her own identity for the guise of another, and the prince's love was directed not toward her true self, but toward the reflection she had cultivated, sown from the memory of her sister's features. She leaned into him, allowing the intimacy, letting him believe he was touching the one he had danced with. Every fibre of her being ached with the weight of the deception, but she pressed it down. He must see me this way. He must love me this way. That is enough. The journey to the palace was long, winding through valleys kissed by the soft light of dawn. Servants lined the roads, bowing low, scattering rose petals in anticipation of the arrival of the prince's bride. Cinderella felt the weight of every eye, every whisper, every glimmer of expectation pressing against her chest. It was intoxicating, horrifying, and utterly consuming. Inside the palace, the grandeur of the halls struck her like a physical force. High ceilings stretched like the skies themselves, chandeliers dripping with crystal light that splintered across the marble floors. Servants moved with quiet precision, carrying trays of silver and gold, polishing the steps and arranging flowers with near religious reverence. Yet, in all this magnificence, Cinderella felt a hollow gnawing at the edges of her heart. Mirrors reflected her every motion. Gilded and infinite, she could see herself from every angle, yet none of the reflections belonged to the girl who had grown up in ashes. She was Drusilla, perfected, immortalized in glass and silk, the real Cinderella, the girl who had scrubbed hearths, endured cruelty, whispered to coals, was gone. And she had chosen this. The prince escorted her to the private chambers prepared for her. The room was vast, draped in velvet and silk, the air perfumed with flowers imported from distant lands. It was a place of dreams, of desires fulfilled, and yet to Cinderella it felt like a cage gilded in gold. He released her arm and took a step back, studying her. "You are more beautiful than I could have imagined," he said, his voice reverent. "I cannot believe I have found you at last." Cinderella's throat tightened. "It is nothing. It is merely what I wear," she whispered. The prince frowned, stepping closer. "No, you are not merely what you wear. You are the one I saw at the ball, the one who vanished at midnight. You are her, and she is perfect." She nodded, allowing the compliment to wash over her, even as her stomach knotted with guilt. She pressed her lips together, willing herself not to tremble. Over the next days, preparations for the wedding continued in earnest. Court officials arrived to oversee arrangements. Musicians rehearsed endlessly. Servants whispered in corners. And throughout it all, Cinderella moved like a shadow, performing the role she had so meticulously chosen. Yet each day, the mask grew heavier. The more she acted as Drusilla, the more she felt herself slipping into the borrowed identity. Her own memories seemed distant, half-formed, like fragments of a dream she could no longer fully recall. One evening, as she sat alone in her chambers, she found herself staring into a mirror. The face reflected back at her was flawless, radiant, unmarked by cinders or soot. It was her sister's face, yes, but the eyes, they betrayed her. The girl in the mirror blinked in recognition, in memory, and yet there was a hollow behind the eyes, an emptiness that mirrored the ache inside Cinderella herself. She touched her face, tracing the curve of the cheek, the line of the jaw, the plumpness of the lips. "Who am I now?" she whispered to the reflection. The mirror did not answer. Her stepsisters, meanwhile, had not given up. News of the prince's search reached them through the palace heralds and street gossip. Annabelle raged, pacing the floors of their home, plotting to intercept the prince, to claim him by cunning or force. Drusilla, quiet and pale, watched the world with hollow eyes, her reflection twisted in rage and despair. "She has stolen everything," Drusilla whispered one night to the empty house. her hands pressed to the cold glass of the window. He loves her. He will marry her, and she is wearing me. Anastel, frantic and desperate, had tried to remind their mother of their beauty, of their grace, of their rightful place as daughters of this house. But the stepmother's eyes, once sharp with cunning, were now wary, almost fearful. The household seemed to shiver with the anticipation of the prince's arrival, the inevitability of Cinderella's triumph. And yet a seed of doubt had begun to take root in Drusilla's mind. The girl she had known, the servant girl, the one who had scrubbed floors and endured cruelty, might not have been as powerless as she had always assumed. She had seen the fire in her eyes that night at the ball, the subtle control in her movements, the quiet command of every gaze she encountered. Drusilla felt a shiver run down her spine. She had underestimated her the day before the wedding. Cinderella wandered the palace gardens, seeking solace among the hedges and fountains. She needed to feel the earth beneath her feet, to hear the sound of water, to remind herself that she was still human beneath the mask. She found herself at the fountain where the godmother had appeared to her, where the reflection of Drusilla had first been imposed upon her own. The water shimmered in the moonlight, smooth and still. She leaned over the edge, watching the ripples distort her reflection. And then she heard it, a whisper, faint and mocking, yet familiar. "You chose this," it said. Cinderella froze, her heart hammering. The reflection in the fountain twisted, becoming something darker, a shadow of herself. The hollow-eyed girl of ashes stared back at her, lips moving without sound. "You chose this," it repeated, louder now, the voice echoing in the chamber of her mind. "You chose to wear her skin. You chose to erase yourself. And now you are lost." Cinderella pressed her hands to her eyes, trying to shut out the sight, but the reflection would not fade. It pressed closer, lips forming a silent scream that mirrored the panic clawing through her chest. And in that moment, she realized the terrible truth. The godmother's bargain was not just a mask. It was a claim, a tether. Every day she wore Drusilla's face, the real Cinderella, the girl who had lived in ashes, slipped further from the world. Each act, each smile, each graceful tilt of her head carved away at her identity, leaving only the illusion behind. She was becoming nothing but a shadow, a reflection of someone else, loved by a prince who would never know her truth. And still, she could not stop herself, for tomorrow she would walk down the aisle, she would be crowned, she would be adored, and the prince would love her, and that, she told herself, was enough. Dawn arrived like a blade of silver across the palace battlements. Light spilled through tall windows, striking the marble floors and gilded walls, igniting every golden detail with brilliance. The castle awoke with a flurry of movement. Servants scuttled along corridors, polishing candlesticks, arranging bouquets of lilies and roses, and aligning the tapestries that depicted the history of the kingdom. The sound of their footsteps echoed like a heartbeat, steady and inexorable, counting down the hours until the prince would claim his bride. Cinderella rose before the servants roused her. She had lain awake through the night, staring at the ceiling and tracing the contours of her borrowed face in the gilded mirror. Every delicate curve of the cheek, every carefully arched brow, every perfect line of the lips reminded her that she was no longer herself. She was Drusilla, perfectly replicated and perfected. The magic had seeped into her bones, into her sinews, into the marrow of her identity, and yet, beneath it all, a tiny spark of the real Cinderella persisted. It fluttered and pulsed like a candle in the wind, faint but stubborn. She could not see it directly, could not touch it, could not measure it, but she could feel its heartbeat against her own. That spark was her conscience, her memory, the self she had traded away for the love she had so desperately craved. She rose from her bed, the silk of her gown gliding across the floor like liquid moonlight. The princess gown fitted her as though moulded to her very soul, every stitch sewn not by seamstress but by magic. The glass slipper gleamed upon her foot, faintly humming with power, as if aware that it had tethered the prince's desire to her very being. The palace corridors were alive with anticipation. Servants bowed low as she passed, their eyes bright with awe and fear. Courtiers whispered among themselves, marvelling at the bride-to-be's radiant beauty, while musicians tuned their instruments, their strings and pipes vibrating with tension and expectation. Every eye in the palace would soon be upon her, yet she felt only the weight of the mask pressing against her, constricting, reshaping her, erasing her. The prince arrived at her chambers with the first toll of the castle bell. His dark eyes met hers, and for a fleeting moment Cinderella felt as though they might see through the illusion, might glimpse the ashes and soot beneath the flawless skin. But he did not. He smiled, and the warmth in his expression seared her with both delight and dread. "You are breathtaking," he murmured. "I feared the night might have been cruel to you, but here you are, more radiant than ever." Cinderella inclined her head, allowing the borrowed smile to grace her lips. "And I feared I would never see the sun rise again," she said, though her voice carried a softness that did not belong to Drusilla. It belonged to the girl who had swept hearths, who had scraped knees and elbows, who had learned to vanish into shadows. But even that voice seemed distant now, drowned beneath the perfection imposed by magic. He offered his arm, and she took it, allowing him to lead her toward the grand hall, where the wedding would occur. The corridors stretched endlessly, the tapestries depicting kings and queens who had come before, reminding her of the weight of history and the inevitability of duty. As they moved, servants and courtiers alike fell silent, bowing and whispering. The air was thick with anticipation, and Cinderella could feel the pulse of the kingdom pressing against her chest. Every heartbeat echoed in her ears, a drumbeat of expectation that threatened to drown the spark of the real self that still clung desperately beneath the mask. The grand hall itself was a cathedral of opulence. Chandeliers hung like frozen constellations, casting fractured light across the marble floor. Rows of benches lined the aisles, filled with nobles, merchants, and dignitaries, all murmuring among themselves, waiting to witness the union of prince and bride. The scent of lilies and roses mingled with the soft smoke of burning candles, a perfume that seemed to intoxicate the very air. Cinderella took her first steps down the aisle, her gown sweeping the floor like a river of moonlight. Each step was measured, deliberate, perfect. Every eye followed her, and she could feel their desire and admiration pressing against her like the weight of a crown, yet unplaced. The prince's gaze never wavered. He walked beside her, his hand lightly resting on hers, as though guiding her through the labyrinth of expectation. "You are mine," he whispered, "and I will never let you go." Cinderella smiled faintly, allowing the words to comfort her, even as the spark of fear flickered within. She had chosen this life. She had begged for this mask, and yet a small, insistent voice inside her wondered if the cost had been too great. As the ceremony began, the priest's voice echoed through the hall, solemn and commanding. "Do you, prince of this kingdom, take this woman? She is perfect," the prince interrupted softly, his eyes never leaving hers. "I do." Cinderella's pulse quickened. The words, though brief, carried the full weight of her dream realized. She was his. He loved her. He would never know the truth of the ashes beneath the mask, the self she had traded away. "And do you, my lady," the priest continued, "take this man to be your husband, to honour, cherish, and obey?" Cinderella hesitated for only a heartbeat, a flinch in the seamless illusion. The spark of her true self whispered urgently, "Speak carefully. This binds you." She nodded, smiling with the borrowed lips of Drusilla. "I do," she said, her voice steady, perfect, flawless. The hall erupted in applause, the sound crashing over her like waves. The courtiers cheered, the servants bowed, and the musicians struck up a jubilant tune. Confetti fluttered through the air, gold and silver, glittering like starlight. Yet beneath the triumph, a current of unease stirred, deep and insistent, and Cinderella could not ignore it. The prince took her hands in his, lifting them to his lips, and the illusion felt complete. She was his, adored by the kingdom, radiant beyond imagination. And yet, When she glanced briefly at the mirror behind the altar, the reflection wavered, flickering with something unbidden, a shadow of soot-stained skin, a trace of the girl who had once lived in the cinders, lingered beneath the borrowed perfection. Her stomach tightened. The spark of herself, her true self, was dimming, pushed into corners by the relentless force of magic, and she realized with sudden clarity that the Godmother's warning had been true. Every enchantment has a root, and every root hungers. The prince's hand tightened around hers as the ceremony concluded. "You are mine," he murmured again, "forever." Cinderella's lips curved into the practiced smile, her heart pounding with fear and exhilaration. She had achieved what she had longed for, what she had begged the Godmother to grant, and yet the hollow whisper inside her would not be silenced. The banquet that followed was a cacophony of laughter, music, and feasting. Nobles toasted the couple, clinking crystal goblets filled with the finest wines. Courtiers whispered behind fans and masks, admiring the bride's beauty, her grace, her perfect composure, and through it all, Cinderella moved like a shadow of someone else, her every gesture flawless, every word measured, every glance precise. She danced with the prince, smiled for the courtiers, nodded to the musicians, and yet beneath the borrowed face, the true girl of ashes stirred faintly, watching, remembering, wondering if she would ever be allowed to return. The first cracks began in the quiet hours after the banquet, in the privacy of the royal chambers, as the guests had departed and the candles burned low. Cinderella sat beside the prince. He brushed a stray lock of hair from her face, his touch reverent, tender. "You are more than I ever imagined," he whispered. "I cannot believe my luck." Cinderella nodded, forcing the smile that Drusilla's lips were meant to hold. And yet, when she caught sight of her reflection in the mirror, it was no longer steady. The borrowed features shimmered, flickered, and for a heartbeat, the ashes and soot of her original self gleamed beneath the surface. Panic surged, raw and sharp. She pressed her palms to the mirror, willing the reflection to remain unchanged. But the spark of herself was insistent, like a small voice screaming in a void. "Remember who you are. Remember yourself." Tears pricked her eyes. She blinked them back, refusing to let the prince see. He must never know. Not yet. She had chosen this path. She had begged for this life. And yet the price was beginning to reveal itself in subtle, insidious ways. The mask was not just a gift. It was a claim, a tether. And every hour she wore it, every smile she gave, every word she spoke, she felt the slow erosion of the girl who had once lived in ashes, and she realized with chilling certainty that the Godmother's warning had not been idle words. The more you wear another's skin, the less of your own you will keep. She had worn it willingly, and now the real danger had begun. She moved through the halls like a shadow wearing another skin, each step precise, each smile rehearsed, each word carefully measured to maintain the illusion. The courtiers adored her, the servants bowed low, whispering their awe. The prince, her prince, looked at her as though she were the only woman in the world, and the glow in his eyes threatened to burn her from the inside out. And yet, beneath the borrowed perfection, the real Cinderella stirred faintly. The ashes and soot of her past, long buried beneath Drusilla's face, whispered in corners, tugging at her memory, reminding her of everything she had lost in exchange for the love she had so desperately sought. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly at first, a hesitation in her step as she moved through the ballroom, a flicker of doubt when the prince's hand brushed hers, a fleeting glimpse in the mirrors that lined the corridors, a shadow of herself, staring back with hollow eyes. Then came the dreams. In the quiet hours before dawn, she awoke, drenched in sweat, the scent of smoke and cinders heavy in her nostrils. She would see the palace burn, the ballroom collapse, the prince's face twist in horror as he realized the truth. She would reach for her own hands and find them gone, vanished into nothingness, leaving only the borrowed mask of Drusilla behind. The dreams left her shaking, trembling, and yet she could not confess them to anyone. The prince's love was absolute, built upon the lie she had begged for. To reveal herself would shatter everything, and so she forced herself to smile, to laugh, to dance, to speak, even as the spark of herself dimmed with each passing hour. Meanwhile, the stepsisters remained in the city, their hearts twisted with envy and fury. Estelle could not bear the thought of Cinderella's triumph. Every day, she roamed the streets in search of news, listening to the whispers of merchants and peasants, aching for any scrap of information that might give her a chance to claim what she believed was rightfully hers. She imagined herself at the palace, walking down the aisle in silks and jewels, wearing the prince's gaze upon her, basking in the glory that had been stolen from her. Drusilla, by contrast, had grown quiet, pale and silent. She watched the world through hollow eyes, her rage simmering beneath the surface. She had begun to question everything she had known about Cinderella, the girl in ashes who had endured cruelty, who had lived in shadows, who had been invisible. Perhaps she had been stronger than they had ever realized. Perhaps she had outwitted them in ways they could not see, and that thought terrified Drusilla. Back at the palace, Cinderella navigated the treacherous waters of court life with increasing skill. She had learned the subtleties of power, the way a glance could command respect, the way a tilt of the head could inspire loyalty, the way a carefully placed word could sway opinion. She had become Drusilla in every outward sense. and yet the cost was immeasurable. Each day she felt herself slipping further from her true self. The girl who had once scrubbed floors, who had endured the cruelty of her stepmother and stepsisters, who had whispered to the ashes for comfort, was fading. The magic had taken root deep within her, reshaping her mind, her memory, her very sense of being. And the worst part was that she had chosen this. She had begged for it. She had surrendered herself willingly in exchange for the prince's love, for the illusion of belonging, for the comfort of being adored. Yet, as she moved through the palace, she could not shake the feeling that something was watching her, something patient and unyielding, waiting for the moment when the mask would falter. It was during a late-night stroll through the palace gardens that the first true sign appeared. The moon hung low, casting long shadows across the manicured hedges and fountains. Cinderella walked alone, seeking solace among the flowers, the scent of night-blooming lilies filling her senses. The gardens were quiet, almost too quiet, and she could feel the weight of her own heartbeat in the silence. And then she saw them, figures at the edge of the garden, shrouded in darkness. Two girls, pale and slender, their eyes fixed on her with intensity. At first, she thought her mind was playing tricks, that the exhaustion and fear had conjured ghosts. But as they stepped closer, the details became clear. Her stepsisters, Annabelle and Drusilla, had found her. Cinderella froze, her breath catching in her throat. The spark of her true self flared, desperate and raw. "You are theirs now," it whispered. "They know, they always knew." The stepsisters moved with precision, circling her like predators. Their expressions were masks of civility, but their eyes betrayed their intent. "You," Annabelle said, her voice soft but venomous, "you have taken everything from us." Drusilla remained silent, her gaze fixed, calculating. There was no warmth in her eyes, no recognition of the sister they had once shared a home with, only judgment, envy, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that they had endured, that they had watched, and that they might yet claim some small revenge. Cinderella forced a smile, masking the terror that clawed at her chest. I am not what you think," she said, her voice trembling despite her best effort. Annabelle laughed, sharp and cruel. "Oh, you are exactly what we think. You wear her face, you have stolen her life, and now you parade it before the prince as if it were yours." The words struck her like a blow. The mask of Drusilla had protected her from the world, had allowed her to claim the prince's love, had allowed her to rise from ashes to glory. And yet, here were the girls who had shared her childhood, who had known the cruelty and the cinders, who now threatened to unmask her, to expose the fragile illusion she had built. Cinderella's hands clenched into fists. The glass slipper glowed faintly, as if sensing her rising fear. She could feel its power tethering the prince's desire, holding him fast to her borrowed image. And yet, even its magic could not shield her from the piercing truth of her stepsister's eyes. "You cannot understand," she said, her voice gaining strength. "This was never meant to hurt you. I have only wanted to be loved, to be seen, to matter." Drusilla's gaze flickered, a brief shadow of recognition crossing her face, but it was fleeting, replaced quickly by cold calculation. "You matter to him, perhaps," she said, "but what of yourself? You are not the girl we knew. You have traded your own skin for someone else's, and one day it will come due." Cinderella felt the words like ice in her veins. The godmother's warning, long ago whispered in the shadows, echoed in her mind. Every enchantment has a root, and every root hungers. She had chosen this path. She had begged for it, and now, confronted by the echoes of her past, she realized that the cost was beginning to manifest. The mask she wore was powerful, intoxicating, and perfect, but it was not her, and every moment she spent beneath its weight pushed the real Cinderella further into oblivion. The stepsisters did not attack, did not storm the palace, or call for her to be stripped of her title. They did something far more insidious. They lingered, they watched, they whispered to the servants, they allowed rumours to reach the prince in subtle, corrosive ways, and Cinderella, alone in her chambers that night, understood the full scope of her choice. The magic that had given her love and power, that had elevated her from ashes to royalty, was also a cage. It tethered her to a borrowed identity, to a life built on another's face, another's skin, another's soul. And the stepsisters, watching, waiting, knowing, were a constant reminder that the roots of the enchantment demanded payment. She pressed her hands to her face, to the mask that was no longer truly a mask, but a second skin. She closed her eyes, willing herself to remember the spark of the girl she had been, the ashes she had left behind. It was faint, weak, flickering like a candle in the wind, but it was still there, and she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that the moment was approaching when the spark would either reignite or be extinguished entirely. The next days would bring confrontation, revelation, and a choice that could not be undone. And Cinderella, Drusilla, Cinderella, girl of ashes, girl of glass, knew that her life, her very self, hung. The palace air had grown tense, heavy with anticipation, as if the walls themselves were aware that something fundamental was shifting. Courtiers whispered in corners, servants scuttled more nervously, and even the musicians found their hands trembling on their instruments. All of it, however, paled in comparison to the storm that brewed in the private chambers of the royal couple. Cinderella sat by the window, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, staring at the gardens below. The moonlight painted the hedges in silver, and the fountains glimmered like liquid crystal. She could see shadows moving, figures pacing just beyond the garden walls. At first, she thought it might be servants patrolling in the night, but the figures were too deliberate, too silent. Her stomach tightened, and a shiver ran down her spine. Annabelle and Drusilla, the stepsisters, had not come to storm the palace gates openly. They had learned patience, observation, the power of subtlety. They watched, they whispered, they sowed quiet seeds of doubt. And now, as if drawn by some invisible thread, they had come close enough for her to feel the weight of their gaze. Cinderella rose slowly, her silk gown brushing the floor. She had become so accustomed to wearing Drusilla's face, moving in her posture, speaking with her voice, that she felt both herself and another at the same time, a duality that was exhausting, exhilarating, and terrifying. When the stepsisters finally entered the palace, it was in the guise of diplomats, bearing gifts from a distant province. Annabelle's smile was as sharp as a knife, Drusilla's quiet and measured. They walked through the grand hall with the poise of those accustomed to being admired, yet their eyes never left her. Every glance, every half smile, every slight tilt of the head was calculated to unsettle her, to remind her that she was no longer fully her own. "Your Highness," Annabelle said, curtsying before the prince, "we bring greetings from our province and gifts to honour your bride." The prince accepted the presents, bowing politely. "Your presence honours us," he said warmly, unaware of the undercurrent that rippled beneath their politeness. Cinderella maintained her composure, smiling faintly. Every word, every movement was precise, yet her heart thumped with unease. She could feel the glass slipper pulsing faintly, as if aware that danger loomed, that the roots of the magic she had embraced were stirring. Drusilla approached her, bowing with impeccable courtesy. "It has been too long, sister," she said softly, her tone edged with something Cinderella could not quite place. Nostalgia, anger, perhaps both. Cinderella's smile faltered, just slightly. "Yes," she whispered. "Too long." The stepsisters lingered, their eyes never leaving hers, even in the company of the prince, even beneath the weight of Drusilla's borrowed identity. Cinderella felt exposed, observed, vulnerable. The first confrontation came at the dinner table, a long, opulent affair. Courtiers filled the hall, their whispers a low hum beneath the clinking of silverware. The prince, unaware of the tension, engaged the stepsisters in conversation, praising their elegance, their wisdom, their insights into the kingdom's affairs. But Annabelle's eyes held fire. "Tell me, dear sister," she said, leaning slightly towards Cinderella, "how does it feel to wear another's face, to move through the world as someone else? Do you ever fear that the mask might slip?" Cinderella's chest tightened. She forced her smile, her voice calm, smooth. "A mask is a gift," she said softly. "It allows one to choose who they wish to be, even for a moment. I am grateful for the guidance I have received." Drusilla's eyes flickered at the words, sharp and accusing. "Guidance or control?" she asked, her tone casual, yet every syllable cut like a blade. "Who truly holds the reins, Cinderella? The magic, or you?" The prince, sensing the undercurrent, frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" he asked. His gaze shifted between the women, concern mingling with curiosity. Cinderella's throat constricted. She wanted to explain, to confess the duality of her existence, the toll of the borrowed identity, the quiet erosion of her own self. But she could not. The prince's love, built on illusion, was a treasure too precious to risk. She smiled instead, serene, flawless. "Only that magic is a tool," she said. "It does not command, unless we allow it." Her stepsisters exchanged a glance, subtle and knowing, before turning their attention back to the prince. But the tension lingered like smoke in the air. Over the next days, the palace grew increasingly fraught. Rumours whispered through the halls, soft, careful, like spiders spinning delicate webs, whispers of deception, of borrowed faces, of hidden truths. The courtier's admiration became tinged with unease. The musician's notes carried tremors. Even the prince, blissfully unaware of the subtle machinations, felt the shift, a faint dissonance in the harmony of his court. Cinderella felt it keenly. The spark of her true self, though still faint, was growing restless. The duality that had been manageable at first was becoming more precarious. Her memories, her instincts, her very essence clawed at her from beneath the borrowed skin. She could feel herself fraying, the edges of Drusilla's perfection pressing against the delicate fibres of her identity. And the stepsisters, they were patient. They did not attack directly, but their presence was constant, like a shadow on the edge of vision. They reminded her of what she had been, what she had lost, and what she risked losing entirely. One night, in the solitude of her chambers, Cinderella confronted the reflection in her mirror. The face staring back at her was flawless, radiant, and impossibly perfect, yet beneath it, faint and flickering, she glimpsed the ashes and soot of her true self. "You are slipping," the reflection whispered, voice soft but insistent. "Do you feel it? Do you see what you have become? You chose this path, but it does not belong to you entirely. Every smile, every gesture, every stolen glance of admiration erodes the girl you once were." Cinderella's hands pressed against the glass, as if she could touch the spark of herself, protect it, anchor it. I cannot lose him," she whispered. "I cannot lose what I have fought so hard to claim." The reflection's eyes gleamed with a quiet fury. "It is not just him, it is you. Every day you wear the mask, you vanish further. One day you will look into this mirror and find nothing left but someone else's face, someone else's life, and then, perhaps, even he will not recognize you." Cinderella shivered. The truth had been always there, quiet, patient, waiting. The godmother's warning echoed once more. Every enchantment has a root, and every root hungers. She had chosen the mask willingly, begged for it, and yet the consequences were no less real. She had traded herself for love, for acceptance, for beauty, and now she understood that the price was her very soul. The next day, the stepsisters' influence became more tangible. They moved among the court, subtle and precise, sowing seeds of doubt. Whispers reached the prince's ears, not accusations, not outright lies, but insinuations, questions, gentle nudges that cast shadows over Cinderella's perfection. "Are you certain of her nature?" one nobleman asked casually. "It is said that those who rise too quickly may conceal deeper truths." The prince dismissed it lightly, but Cinderella felt each word like a stone in her chest. The roots of the enchantment were demanding payment, and she was beginning to see how hunger could manifest, not as fire or violence, but as erosion, subtle, relentless, inescapable. By the evening, the tension reached its peak. In the grand hall, where candles flickered and shadows danced, Cinderella felt the mask strain. Drusilla's borrowed perfection began to flicker just for an instant, revealing a glimpse of the girl beneath. A servant gasped. A noblewoman leaned forward. The prince froze, sensing the tremor in the illusion. Cinderella caught her breath, pressing her palms to her face, willing the mask to hold, willing Drusilla's skin to remain flawless. But the spark of herself surged, insistent, demanding recognition, demanding acknowledgement. She realized then that the godmother's magic was not infinite. It could sustain the illusion, yes, but only as long as her will did not falter. And now, confronted by the presence of the stepsisters, the scrutiny of the court, and the insistent pulse of her own identity, she felt that will bending, straining, ready to break. She had won the love of a prince, achieved beauty and power beyond imagination, and yet the price was becoming terrifyingly clear. She might not survive herself. The stepsisters watched, patient and cunning, knowing that every second the mask remained in place. The roots of the enchantment dug deeper into Cinderella's soul, and the question lingered, unspoken, in the charged air. When the mask finally falters, what or who would be left? The prince had been patient, unwavering, and blind to the subtle erosion of her essence. He loved her, adored her, saw her as perfect, and yet she knew that love was built on borrowed skin, on a borrowed life, and she wondered how long even the strongest love could endure the truth of absence beneath the illusion. The stepsisters arrived unannounced, slipping into the palace, with the ease of those who had observed, waited, and planned. Anastelle's eyes burned with quiet fury, Drusilla's with a cold, calculating fire. They did not speak at first, letting their presence settle in the room like a weight. "You've done well," Anastelle said finally, her voice soft, almost conspiratorial. "Better than I could have imagined. The prince is utterly bewitched." Cinderella forced a smile, but it did not reach her eyes. "And what is it you want from me?" she asked, her voice trembling. She could feel the glass slipper's pulse beneath her foot, tethering the prince's love, holding him fast to her borrowed identity. Drusilla stepped closer, her gaze piercing. "We want you to remember yourself," she said. "You have hidden long enough behind a mask. Every day you wear her face, you vanish a little more. The magic you begged for is not a gift, it is a cage." Cinderella's stomach twisted. I cannot stop now. If I reveal myself, the prince will be shocked," Drusilla said, her tone gentle but firm. "But he will love you still, the real you, not the borrowed skin, not the illusion, but the girl who lived in ashes, who survived cruelty, who endured. He may not understand at first, but he will recognize truth when it stands before him." The words were a blade to Cinderella's heart. She had feared this moment, yet it had come regardless. The spark of herself, small and stubborn, surged within her, demanding release. That night, she sought the Godmother. The air in the palace garden was cool and fragrant, the fountains singing softly in the moonlight. Cinderella found her there, as if waiting, as if the very roots of the magic had known this day would come. "I cannot continue," she whispered, her hand shaking. "The mask, it is consuming me." The fairy godmother's eyes, deep and knowing, studied her. "You knew the price," she said softly. "Every enchantment has a root, and every root hungers. You asked to wear another's skin, to step into another's life, and now you feel the cost." Cinderella began, tears threatening to spill. "I wanted love, I wanted to be seen, but it is not enough. The mask is all I am, and I cannot endure it." The godmother reached out, her hand brushing Cinderella's cheek. "Then you must choose. The magic can be undone, but the path back is yours alone. You will reclaim your true self, but the prince must see the girl beneath. Will he still love you? That is not mine to say. That is your trial, your gift, your burden." Cinderella nodded, resolve hardening in her chest. "I will risk it," she said. "I will show him I cannot live as a shadow any longer." At dawn, she returned to the grand hall. The court had gathered once more, unaware that the final act of the masquerade was about to unfold. The prince stood near the throne, his expression calm, expectant, as though ready to marvel once again at her perfection. Cinderella approached, her steps deliberate, The mask of Drusilla shimmered faintly in the morning light, then began to fade, curling back like smoke until her true features emerged. The girl of ashes, the one who had scrubbed floors and endured cruelty, stood before them all. Gasps echoed through the hall. Courtiers whispered in astonishment. Even the prince stepped back, his eyes wide with shock. "You," he breathed, unable to form a coherent sentence. Cinderella lifted her chin, her eyes meeting his. "I am not who you believed," she said. "I am the girl who lived in cinders, who endured everything, who begged for love and sought it in a borrowed skin. But I cannot continue the deception. I am myself." The hall was silent. The tension was tangible, like a held breath awaiting a storm. Then the prince stepped forward, his gaze, unwavering, held her. "You are still the one I danced with," he said softly. "Not because of perfection, but because of who you are beneath it. I do not care for the mask. I care for you." Cinderella's breath caught. The spark of herself surged, bright and strong, illuminating the shadows that had threatened to consume her. She smiled, truly smiled, as tears slid down her cheeks. The stepsisters watched from the back of the hall. Anastelle's face softened. Drusilla's still held its cold edge, but there was acknowledgement, respect for the courage it had taken to shed the magic that had held her in thrall. Cinderella turned to them. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady, "for reminding me of who I am. I could not have reclaimed myself without your presence, without your persistence." Drusilla inclined her head slightly. Anastelle gave a faint, grudging smile. The acknowledgement was enough. The prince took Cinderella's hand in his touch grounding her, affirming her existence beyond the borrowed skin. "We face the world together," he said. "Not the illusion, not the mask, but you and me. And I will love you always, for all that you are." Cinderella nodded, the ashes of her past and the spark of her reclaimed self merging into one. The godmother appeared briefly in the doorway, her expression unreadable, and then vanished, leaving only the memory of her guidance. The court erupted into celebration, not for the illusion, but for the courage, the truth, and the love that endured beyond magic, beyond masks, beyond deception. And Cinderella, at last, knew that she was whole. She was herself, no longer Drusilla, no longer a shadow, but the girl of ashes reborn, cherished and loved for her true self. The roots of the enchantment had hungered, yes, but she had reclaimed what was rightfully hers, her identity, her love and her life. And in the prince's unwavering gaze, she saw a promise that needed no magic, no mask, no borrowed skin, only truth.